Paul Roos here from Performance by Design, and welcome again to the Culture Couch with my partner in crime once again, Gerard Murphy. G'day, Murph.
G'day, Roosy. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, we've got a great mate of yours today, John Higgins from Higgins Coatings. And again, John, I'm not going to give you a long-winded introduction. I want you to give the viewers a little bit of a snapshot of how you got into the business and just give us a summary of, and then we'll get into some hard-hitting questions.
Happy. Good to see you, Paul. Gerard.
John.
Always a pleasure to see both of you. Okay, so fundamentally I 65 years old, grew up in Brunswick, went to the local schools, ended up at Xavier eventually, went to university, studied economics. I was really hopeless at school. I was fundamentally a lazy kid. So I was only then eventually got into business, enjoyed business. And the business I joined was, my father's Irish. Dad came out to Australia in 1949. He's 95 at the moment, about to turn 96. So he really came from a very poor environment, West Coast Island. We're talking about sort of dirt floors, no running water. So he was one of 8 kids in the middle and decided he wanted to get ahead in life. And therefore he had 3 siblings that went to New York, 2 to London. And he said, no, I really want to get out on my own. So he came to Australia on his own, met my mother here. But he ended up at Mount Beauty, where they gave you a sack to sleep. They'd fill it with straw and you'd sleep on that as a bed. So he was disappointed that the land of opportunity actually treated him so poorly when he arrived. But he's always been quite positive and driven. So eventually he came back to Melbourne and started his own small painting business. So that's the business I joined after university. I joined with 2 brothers. I have 2 other sisters that aren't shareholders in the business. But I realised early on that for one family to live off a business as they did, they lived well. But for 4 families to live off it, it was actually going to be quite challenging. So I was always interested to look around for other things. So that led me to investing in some different businesses. We went into asbestos removal. I went over to America to try and set up some asbestos furnaces with a partner. That was in the 87 crash. I didn't understand what an 87 crash was. We were over there meeting all these venture capitalists in Chicago. They all walked out of the room. I was shocked that everybody was so rude, but I didn't realise that the share market crash had occurred while we were in the room.
Really?
So afterwards I understood what it all meant. So that was really my introduction to sort of business in a lot of respects. So that led us to going over to Poland at the time, and it was still communist. The communist system broke down during that year, but we actually were looking at a seafood business. We bought a seafood business in 1989. October, it was the first majority-owned joint venture in Poland after the communist system. So it was really a fascinating time. It was a wild west. So that led us on to doing other things. We ended up in brewing eventually. And then we've moved on to a bunch of other businesses.
I want to start because one of the big things I talk about, or we talk about, is role modelling. And it's interesting now, I've got 2 boys, 23 and 25. And a lot of their sort of role models are on Instagram or on Facebook or through different mediums that we didn't have back then. So I want to talk to you about your dad, because for us, the generation that we grew up in, it was all about touch and feel, wasn't it? It was the school teacher, the footy coach or whatever. So tell us about the lessons you learnt from your dad during those early, maybe late teens, and as you were going into your...
I think... So Dad was a very positive individual. He was certainly driven. He's charming. Everybody loved him. They saw him as being tough but fair. And I know as a young kid going out around sites with him, he could be quite brutal if he saw somebody doing the wrong thing or not painting the right way. So he'd take the brush off them and show them how to do it. But he'd always go back 10 minutes later and talk to them to explain why I did what I did. And they said, Jerry, no, you were right. We understand completely. They loved him. They'd do anything for him. And there was a lot of funny stories because there was little things that a couple of Irish guys used to drink a little bit too much on Saturday night and always be locked up. So he'd turn up Sunday to get them out of, it might have been Pentridge in those days you were taken to. So he'd go get them, but that was part of the routine. They respected him, he loved them. And so I think driven, totally believed in people, but really optimistic. And that's what really got him to Australia. So I think a great role model, but if you mention also role models, one of the things I learned in my mid-20s when I was in business is that he was very good at what he did, but he wasn't necessarily the best teacher.
Yeah.
So I went searching for some teachers and fortunately found a mentor who actually came in to sell me some sales training. And I didn't know how to make the decision about which sales trainer I would use. So I got them back individually, the 2 guys, and gave each of them the other's proposals. And the other one guy said, oh, that's a really good program, and I think it'll be excellent. And this guy I caught up with, Malcolm Kemp, he looked at the proposal and said, I can't believe you're such an idiot. And I said, I love it. I said, seriously, I don't want to do the sales training. I'd like you to be my mentor. So Malcolm was 55. He just retired from running a public company. He started from scratch in the scaffolding industry. Incredibly successful organisation, Australia-wide, really salespeople focused. So we worked out a deal where I bought his time. So I bought every Monday afternoon off him. And basically, because I said I was interested to know everything you know at 55, I would like to know it at 25. So I think that made a big difference because I had the combination of somebody who was a great teacher and challenging and taught me a lot about business and systems and people, whereas Dad was just a natural doer. So it was a good combination.
And what did your mentor, what did, if you had to pick 2 or 3 things that you took from him, what were they?
He was very strong on structure, procedures, systems, and training. A real believer in training and developing people. To the extent that they would basically advertise for sales managers when they were looking for salespeople, and basically talk them into going back to what they were really good at, on the assumption that most people get over promoted, and they end up in a role where they're fundamentally not happy, they can't do it, so they really got them back into that. So a passionate believer in training. And also, I think the other aspect was simple little things. Don't suffer fools. If you think you got one, just move them on instantly. Really is very strong on inspecting. That people fundamentally, they want you to inspect, because you can inspect to obviously critical or actually to compliment. Yep. So you need to inspect, not expect. And you've got to be out there around your people, being involved, that sort of thing.
Great. And just coming back to Higgins, Ruzi spoke about your dad as a role model. Having spent a bit of time working with the company, it's a wonderful company. There's a very strong family feel in it, John. Has that come down from your dad, or is that something that you and Jared, your brother, have tried to create? But there's a number of families involved where you've got parents and children working. Yeah,
I think that it's an interesting question, because I should also mention my mother. So Dad was the painter who then ended up, he really stopped painting in the early days, but he's out around the sites all the time and with customers, whereas my mother ran the office. So they were an amazing team. So I can't underestimate Mum being part of it, because she was seriously good as an administrator and running the office. So I think that as a family, we've always been close. So there's been the 5 siblings, and we all do get on well. And even as the family is extended, we still spend a lot of time together. So I think that's fundamentally, you can see us at work, and we can actually have our disagreements or whatever. But when we get together socially, it's just as if we're seeing each other the first time, and we can really enjoy that whole experience. So I think it's just been us and how we've grown up. And I think we've each taken it into our own families, but still the bigger, broader family, when we get together, we actually all get on really well.
So when did you see yourself as a leader? So you've talked about a couple of mentors, your father and Malcolm, I think you mentioned his name. But at what point did you really start to see yourself as a leader? And then the second part of that question is, then you became quite inquisitive, to your own point, and started branching out from Higgins. Did that coincide together, or are they sort of two separate?
No, and I think it was just a journey of learning. I think that I do remember I was probably about 13 or 14. I went to Xavier. I was standing for a group of guys in a quadrangle one day talking about whatever, and I'd always been a fairly shy sort of person, and I was standing there with a group talking about things. And in that moment, I can always remember that, hey, I don't have to just be a follower of the group. I actually can lead it.
Yep.
And it was just, not that it made any difference to anything I did then, but it was just a moment of something like one of the ahas. So I think that there was that. And then as I then went, in my early 20s, I went and saw every speaker that came out from America. So I went to every seminar, read every book, and I always went with the idea of looking for one idea that I actually could take and use either in business or for myself. So I was exposed to lots and lots of people, read hundreds and hundreds of books. And I think from that, you learn a lot about yourself and people and leadership. So it was a journey over a number of years.
And what about the acquisition of some of the other companies you talked about? When did you start to think laterally and start to say, we can't put food on the table for 4 groups of families? What drove that?
I think I was very determined to be successful. In those days, it was fundamentally, I wanted to make money. because I knew that basically money, it's not the end goal, but it actually gives you freedom to actually make choices. And I think that's what I was always driven by, was to actually be able to really fundamentally do what I want. I always said to do what I want, when I want, as often as I want, wherever I want, with whoever I want. So that was really, money was that, to give you that sense of freedom. And not that it necessarily meant that you actually changed a lot of things, but it was just, that was the goal.
I was going to, just on your acquisitions, you mentioned in passing
Yes.
a trip to Poland, and in that period you bought a small brewery, and it turned into something a little bit bigger than that.
It's turned into a very large business now. We basically are in partnership with Heineken. We're still on the board. It's a large operating business. We would make the equivalent of 4.5 billion bottles of beer a year.
How did it come about?
At the time, I was fortunate enough that I met an individual in the painting business who came in and basically wanted the job, and I sent him to the opposition company because I said we didn't do the type of work he wanted. He came back 6 months later and said, I like you, I want to work for you. So I gave him a job and said, let's go out and find that type of work you're all good at, and we'll do it. I realised it was a silly decision at the time, and I said, just stay out of the office, because every time I see you, I'm reminded of a bad decision. He went off, made some money, came back, lost it, and it just was a journey over time that he then said, one day, let's go and have a look. So we went and had a look. And I've always basically, if you understand the downside in any decision you make, I think you should actually take the risk and do it.
Right.
Because upside will take care of itself, but I've always worked on the basis of
worst case scenario.
Understand the worst case, if I can live with it.
Yep.
So the critical thing was to invest an amount of money that if we lost it, we could afford that, we could still live.
Yep.
So that was the critical thing.
Yeah, okay.
So that was a foundation of how I really then took more risks. And a lot of people at the time would say, well, it's very risky, why are you doing that? I said, but you should go and have a look and make up your own mind of how risky it is. So sure, I was going to a communist country. It was at the other side of the world. So, but I'd say to people, go and have a look. If you don't actually step out and have a look, you'll never make another decision to change anything in your life.
It's a great point, but also back in those days, I guess, we talk a lot about culture and leadership. What did you see of those countries? You touched on America going there and the crash, and then going to Poland. What did you see of culture and leadership in those international countries?
I was really impressed in the early days. I went from looking at it from a painting perspective to New York, and went out and met a number of contractors and met up with the unions. And I love their attitude. Americans, I got a bunch of cousins there, and they've always had a sort of an attitude of that we can get it done.
Yeah.
And they were all promoting each other all the time. And even to the extent that I was really impressed with the union, because in one of the meetings I was at, they were talking about a difficult employee, and the union said, leave it to us, we'll go fix it.
Right.
So it wasn't as if the union arguing with the owners of the business that you've got a problem, we're going to protect the person. They said, we agree, he's not up to the standard he should be, we'll go fix it, which meant that they would go and remove him. So I think culturally completely different. I think that Poland was fascinating, because in the early days, in '89, when the communist system broke down, as if they walked into a country and turned the lights back on, and everything that was in place had been there for sort of 40 odd years. It was sort of newish 40 years ago. So you turned the lights back on and realised that the system actually had really controlled people. And I think the people were amazing. But it was fascinating, because I remember talking to one of the young girls in the early days in our office, and how she felt about the changes that had taken place. And she said, my grandparents are so excited because they remember what it was like pre-communism, and they think it's the best thing ever. My parents have only known communism, so they don't understand why it's such a big change and why it'll be good. So she said, I'm stuck. I really believe it's going to be a great thing, but it's such early days, I'm getting conflicting views. And I think that, and now I think that they would see it as it's an amazing change that's occurred. Sure, in any change in society, there's people who do get left behind. But it was just, what I admired is they're great people, well-educated, fiercely determined, enormous pride in what they do. So quite incredible race of people, yeah.
So we've got painting.
Yep.
We've got brewing.
Yep.
And then you go into medical research?
Well, I've been in a few other things. We used to own Melbourne Aquarium. And we had half a dozen aquariums around the world. I had a compressor business in America where we manufactured compressors for commercial air conditioning. There was an Australian guy invented it. Myself and another guy backed it. It became really the technology that took over the world. We then eventually sold it to a large group, Danfoss, and that really is now, I think, 70% market share of commercial air conditioning compressors in the world. So it was really an incredible product that every engineer in the world said would never work. So I was just used to get out there, try something, see what happens. So I think that your question, medical research. Yeah, in recent years, I've been very supportive of an area called traumatic brain injury. They've been working at a group have been working at it for about 14 years. I invested about 5-6 years ago. Then with my brothers, they joined me about 4 years ago. So what we're doing at the moment, traumatic brain injury is when you have the one punch, the car crash, the bomb going off.
Yeah.
So your intracranial pressure increases, and fundamentally, most people die unless you release the pressure. So drugs been developed. We've been through phase 1 human trial. We've been through preclinical, phase 1 human, and phase 2 at the moment, where we're putting the drug into unconscious people. Initially in Australia, and then we'll be doing a larger study at sort of Cambridge University Hospital.
Fantastic.
So that really has enormous potential, because I said 800,000 people a year die from it. Those who live,
800,000,
and those who live have their life completely changed. Because what they tend to do is cut out a piece of the skull, allow the brain to expand, that part of the brain dies.
Right.
So there's that. Now, if we believe that'll work, we've actually proven it in sheep trials, but if that does work, we'll then actually have already developed the drug for concussion. So the aim will be of concussion is it will take more research, but once you are knocked out, when you wake up, the theory is you'll take a pill, it'll stop the effects of that concussion, the multiple effects of concussion. So there's a lot of people who don't believe it, but we've seen in all the research we've done that can work. Separately, we've gone into through that we met some other people at all in University of South Australia. And now we're doing a lot of work around cancers. And it's early days, but we are at the stage where we believe we'll have an early detection. We initially have it through tissue, then blood, of things like prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, colon cancer. Yeah, so again, they're amazing fields. We've got incredible teams of people and doing a lot of research.
Fantastic.
And I think that they should be very successful financially. But I think, bottom line is they'll save lots of lives.
And then probably the one which we're really interested in, and we do a lot of work in, is the space of positive psychology.
Yep.
How did you get into that? And tell us about the work you're doing in that.
Well, positive psychology, because I'd actually obviously read lots of books around the topic of self-development, etc. It sort of led me on a journey. Initially, it's funny, it started with the guy, Tony Robbins. A lot of people see it as a cult. So I joined the cult for a number of years and followed him all over the world. I went to lots of seminars, walked on Coles lots of time, because his whole attitude was that I'll actually teach you something that everybody says in life you can't do, and you'll do it successfully. So when somebody in the future tells you something you can't do, just accept that you'll make up your own mind and it'll be easier than you think. So I just accepted that was just fundamentally a metaphor. So I think that... So Robbins, I think I've always believed, is one of the greatest influences or changes of behaviour of people I've ever come across. That led me to read about a guy called Martin Seligman.
Yes.
Martin Seligman's out of Pennsylvania University. He's the founder of positive psychology. And positive psychology is fundamentally where everybody lives the whole population lives between -10 and +10. And he said psychology traditionally works with people between -10 and 0, tries to get them from -10 or even a little bit higher up to 0. Whereas positive psychology is really to deal with the majority of the population who live between 0 and +10. So I got the opportunity to go, read his book, met him at a few seminars, then finally got to meet him. And the concept came up that we should set up a centre of positive psychology in Melbourne. I worked with a few schools where we put the concepts through it. I was fundamentally driven to change education because I think that I came across a young guy a number of years ago who was brilliant academically, brilliant at sport, a leader at the school, and a year or so out of school, the wheels had fallen off his life. And I thought there's something missing because I think if it's important, if you have great mentors, whether it be parents or friends in your life, you can learn a lot of things. And I think, but if you don't have that opportunity, which I fortunately did, you should learn it through school. You're there for 13 years. So my aim was to change education and say that we should teach kids the fundamentals of how to live a happy, meaningful life while they're at school. So later in life where they come across there can be major obstacles, they know how to influence and change their own behaviour or influence and change the behaviour of those around them. So that's where I started on the journey of positive psychology. We worked with a school, but my goal was to change education. So I realised doing it school by school was too slow. So I went to Melbourne University. I initially met the Vice-Chancellor about the idea. He liked it. And then I caught up with Phil Rickards, who was the Dean of the Graduate School of Education, which at the time, and still is, it's the number 2 graduate school of education in the world. So we tossed the idea around. Field's a very positive individual. He loved it. So I gave them the money to set up a chair of positive psychology, which led to the establishment of the centre. So now we've got a staff of 20 professors, associate professors, doing incredible research. We've had 200 students finish their masters, where they spent a year studying it. They're out in society now, whether it be in business, working for themselves, in schools, implementing the concepts of positive psychology. So it's really been a very satisfying thing, because I think fundamentally, in the end, if we can actually teach young people these skills that just can transform their own lives and their lives of anybody around them. So if they go into business, the principles are part of them, just how they culturally work within an organisation
around them.
Yeah.
And I think I got a chance to listen to him speak at the Happiness as a Causes in Sydney,
Yep.
and they were working at Geelong Grammar, weren't they?
Were. He did a lot of work at Geelong Grammar. They took the concept right through from everybody that sort of works in sort of maintenance, the gardens, through to administration, the teachers, students, and even programs for parents.
Yep.
I think
and a lot of it, just to explain it, so the way I see it is, a lot of it is based around, as quickly as you possibly can, finding the things that you're really good at. Is that a basic fundamental of what you do?
Well, I think it's a critical thing is finding out what you're good at. No, there's two things I'd mention. One is that you can go on their website in Pennsylvania, and they've got a program called Signature Strengths. I think there's 24 signature strengths. So you go on and do a questionnaire, 240 questions. They send you an email back with your signature strengths in order 1 to 24. And the argument is that they say, take your top 6 and live them, you'll be a happier, more fulfilled person. So what you do is you actually find out more about yourself. I did it a number of years ago, got the report back, looked at it, thought, that's a lot of rubbish, put it away. Picked up the next day, looked at it and said, nah, that's fundamentally me.
Yeah.
And I know it's me because I know the priority of the skills I have, or the strengths. I know when I use them, I'm good at it, and I know that I actually feel satisfied from it. So that's basically a really important thing, is knowing yourself. But the other thing is actually to acknowledge the good. And I think that they'll argue that one of the critical things is, if you actually, before you go to bed at night, if you write down 3 good things or great things that occurred to you that day, they can test you in a short period of time. You'll know you'll be a happier person in yourself. Because it's easy to keep remembering the things that don't work or are failing or what you need to change, which I find I naturally go to that position. I'm told by lots of people in business, because I'm trying to understand the downside. Because everybody I'm dealing with is talking about how good it's going to be and the upside is going to be unbelievable. And I'm thinking, well, especially in this environment.
But it's a great point, because what really struck me, and having coached a team and us putting a team together and working with you guys as well, is too often we focus on the things that people can't do. And not enough do we say, well, this guy is good at this. And if we're putting a team together and we're working out what people are really good at, and we're putting them in the roles, then they're going to be happier. You're going to be happy because they're able to fulfill the role. So it's a really important part of putting a team together, isn't it?
Totally. And the thing is, because if you can actually understand yourself, so therefore you know what roles you should be in, and if the people around you understand you as well, it sort of it makes such a difference. I've had that example many, many years ago. I was actually working with my brothers when we did a whole range of psychological testing at the time. And it's probably the first time we analysed each other and then understood each other's strengths. So I just meant when you got into a discussion, you could say to one, well, you're really good at this, give us your views.
Yeah.
And he knew it, and it's the first time he probably realised in his life he was really good at it, but he actually then spoke up, and his thinking was actually made such a difference.
Yeah, it's a simple concept. It's a concept we forget, because particularly as Australians, and I guess the industry I come from, it's all about fixing your faults, getting better at your faults, rather than saying, and the best players, to be perfectly frank, almost put their faults to the side, and they work out a way to sort of minimise them completely, and their strengths are what makes them absolutely great at what they do. And
well, most people do most things right most of the time.
Yeah.
And yet we continually find things that they're not doing well.
What about the common themes of all the companies you've worked with? What are some of the common things in terms of leadership and culture?
I think the common theme of good organisations, which I've learned through you guys, is fundamentally to have really clear, open and honest communication. And I think that if you can do that, it's basically, you want people to feel safe and comfortable to be able to express whatever it is that's on their mind. Most people clearly know what it is a business needs to do to be better. Because they'll be telling others. They'll be telling people when they get a cup of coffee, they'll go home and tell their wife, girlfriend or whatever, They know the people that don't fit in. They know the people that don't work. Because if you just ask them, they can.
Yeah.
Let's see, who's the dickhead in your room? You know, everybody knows.
Everyone knows. Yeah.
So I think that it's been open and honest communication. I think is critical. I think that's really important. And I think that the thing you see is that in good organisations it exists. One of the things I've found in a lot of organisations that people tend to mix the person with the actions and put them together. And I've always tended to prefer to separate the two, because I would only work with you if I actually really, I trust you, I believe in you, you're part of our culture of our organisation, but it doesn't mean that everything you do is right. So if there's something that's not right, I can sit down with you and talk about the actions, and I'm not getting into you as the core of a person. I'm wanting to keep them separate. If I have problems with you as a person as well then you won't be part of the company.
Yeah.
And I think people find it difficult to have conversations with people because they put them together, and I like you, so I can't now bring up something that we need to improve or change.
Yeah. And to that point, we almost have the opposite approach. It's I like you, that's why I'm giving you feedback.
Yep.
I like you, and I want you to be better. And I think you're 100% right. It's funny how people, for some reason, think, because he's a really good mate, I can't give him feedback. I take the opposite. If he's a really good mate, you actually should give him feedback because you should want him to get better.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Murph, I'm going to leave the last comment to you, because you've known John for many, many years. How would you sum John up, and obviously working with Higgins Coating for so many years, and how would you sum up him as a person, but also the company as well?
I think John is super inquisitive. I've never met a person that reads more, asks more questions, drives you insane with questions. Would that be fair?
That's very fair.
Yeah. And the other thing, I think he's very direct.
Yeah.
So you'll never die wondering what John thinks. So just asking you, what do you think are your best leadership attributes?
My best leadership. I think that I tend to understand a situation fairly quickly. I think I sort of analyse information fairly quickly. So I'm actually good in a group environment where we're trying to solve an issue, because I like everybody's input. So I like to get the group together, work out clearly what the issue is, and then I learnt from a guy, Michael Hewitt-Gleason, a number of years ago, that there's a current view of a situation and a better view. And the aim is use the group to work out a better way to go about whatever it is we're going to do. And there's no bad ideas, and it may be the 10th idea that you get that's brilliant, but you've got to go through the hard work of getting down to close to 10 to actually get the brilliance to come through. So I think I've always enjoyed that. I like that. That's what I think I'm generally have been. And
then probably the last question for me is, what advice would you give to the young John Higgins? If you're looking back now, John is
I think I think one of the important things is to really understand what your strengths are. You know, I know through the education system I grew up in, I was always at the bottom of every class and struggling all the time. So I just was consistently reinforced that I wasn't good enough and I was pretty stupid. So I think when I got out of that environment, I learned that I had skills, and therefore I started to focus on them and using them. So that made an enormous difference. Yeah. So I think number one, work out what your skills are. Two, and believe in yourself. And I think believe in yourself and dream big. You've got to dream big. Don't be limited by people around you who've tried things and failed. If your parents say, I wouldn't do that because I tried that many years ago and it didn't work. Well, accept that that's their journey, not your journey. Yeah. Don't have any limits to what you can do, because I think life is one of the most incredible experiences, and you actually can achieve an enormous amount if you just don't limit your thinking. Once you've thought about it and dreamt, you've got to then work out actual plans to go and implement it, and sometimes realise it may have been a stupid idea in the first place, but just don't limit your thinking.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, it's a great way to finish the conversation. And I mean, one of the great things for me is being out of the footy world and getting to meet people like yourself, John. And I remember when we first met and I walked out, it's like you want solutions, and too many people try and create more problems. But you do have the ability to say, well, what do we do? How do we do it better? And you don't take offence to any direct and honest feedback yourself. And so getting to know you, getting to meet you, getting to work with your company's been fantastic. So we really, really appreciate the messages that you've come across today. Great lessons in culture and great leadership and great experience. So thanks very much, Murph. Thank you. But mate,
thanks, Paul.
Fantastic.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks.
So good. Jared.
Thanks, guys. Another Culture Couch wrapped up. We'll see you next time.